A lot of people think of investment banks as growth engines of the economy and places where companies will go to supercharge an explosive trajectory by going public on the stock exchange or buying another business to drive growth. And this is largely true, but what if I told you that there is a dark side to all of this? Failed M&A transactions and leveraged buyouts can load companies with debt and push them into precarious financial situations. And combined with bad management and an economic downturn, can sometimes create situations so dire that there's no other option than to remove the company from existence. But in an effort to stave off this untimely fate, there's one place at the investment bank where the unlucky losers of corporate America go in search of one last chance at survival. This isn't where some go-lucky sell-side M&A banker just slaps an overly optimistic valuation multiple on a business with hopes of capturing a larger fee. No, this is where the tough conversations happen and where the tough decisions are made that ultimately end in life or death. Welcome to the Restructuring Group. So there's already a lot of videos out there on investment banking, but I honestly haven't seen that many good videos that talk about restructuring. In restructuring, instead of working with the company to help it grow, you're literally trying to save a sinking ship by advising distressed companies through bankruptcies and turnaround situations. And because of this, restructuring can sometimes be seen as the dark side of investment banking because nobody's really happy when their company's about to go under. And as a result, it can be sometimes a pretty sharp-elbowed environment. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Huang, and I'm a current management consultant in New York and a former investment banking analyst. And during my junior year summer internship, I interned at a restructuring-focused investment bank in New York and was able to get exposure to a number of bankruptcy situations. I make these videos because I like to, but also because I would have wished that somebody would have made these when I was a student. And honestly, my only goal here is to create extremely valuable content that you guys want to watch. If you like the topic of this video, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my future uploads. Also, if you're interested in restructuring, stick around to the end where I talk about my favorite resources for learning about bankruptcy and restructuring. Let's get into it. So the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, why do companies need investment banks to help with restructuring? Now, there's a number of reasons why a company might become distressed, but oftentimes it's a combination of either continued underperformance over time, poor management, and even just bad luck. But it's oftentimes a combination of all of these. When a company underperforms, it's not able to generate enough cash flow to run its own business and also to pay down its obligations like debt. And debt is a really tricky instrument because when you take out a loan from lenders, you basically sign what's known as a credit agreement, which is a legally binding document that says that you have to pay the lenders X amount of interest every period or else they can force you into bankruptcy. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, interest isn't even that much, right? It's just a few percentage points. But you have to remember that in a corporate situation, if you take out a $500 million loan with a 5% interest rate, that's $25 million in interest that you have to pay, which if your business is underperforming, it might not be able to generate in time. And if you're not able to pay your lenders back in time, you go into what's known as default. You're basically delinquent. And when this happens, the lenders have the right to force you into a bankruptcy court. Now, there's two types of bankruptcy situations that are most common in the US. The first is going to be a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is when the company essentially sells all of its assets off and ceases to exist. And I think this is what most people think of when they think of the word bankruptcy. And the other, which is actually more common though than a Chapter 7, is a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is not when the company ceases to exist, but rather gets a period of time to figure out basically how it's going to get its together and pay back its creditors. But after a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the company is often better off than when it started. And so it's a positive outcome for everybody involved. So now at this point, you still might be wondering, why do we need to hire investment bankers, right? Because bankruptcy is a court-governed process. And so couldn't you just hire a bunch of lawyers and have them help you with this process? The problem is that the lawyers are not as well versed in the financial side of the business, nor are they as well versed in the capital structure. And so this is where your expertise as an investment banker comes in, because you understand valuation and you also understand capital structure. And these are two of the most important things in a restructuring situation, because oftentimes when a company is distressed, the value of the business is far lower than what it normally would be at. And so it's very tricky coming up with the proper valuation when you're negotiating with lenders. Additionally, during these negotiations, you're probably going to quote unquote restructure the business, which just means figuring out what you can do to the debt and equity of the business to pay back the people that you owe money to. So what does this mean for a junior banker in the restructuring group? Well, as As a junior banker, you're going to be doing a lot of financial modeling in Excel. You are going to be putting together decks in PowerPoint, and also you're going to be spending a lot of time reading through the credit documents, because when it comes to negotiations, you need to have an extremely clear understanding of not only the value of the business, but also the different things that the lenders can do to you. So why should someone do restructuring? Well, restructuring is one of the most technical groups that you can join as an investment banking analyst. And this is not only because you need to learn traditional M&A concepts, but also because you need to understand debt very well and the bankruptcy process. And it's also a really interesting field because there's a game theory aspect to the negotiations, because you have to understand that all the different parties involved have their own self-interests. And in order to get to a successful negotiated outcome, you need to account for these interests. A really important distinction also in restructuring is that many of the large bulge bracket investment banks like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley cannot advise in restructuring situations because they often have a lending arm. And if, for example, Goldman Sachs lent a $500 million loan to Home Depot and then Home Depot goes bankrupt, if Goldman Sachs wanted to advise on the restructuring, they would have a conflict of interest because they might want to advise Home Depot in a way that would allow them to get their money back before others. And so because of this, a lot of the top investment banks in the restructuring space are actually what are known as the elite boutiques, which are small advisory focused investment banks that don't have a lending arm. So these are going to be firms like PJT Partners, Centerview Partners, and Evercore. And as for exits, the typical exits from restructuring are going to be very similar to traditional M&A, which means you can exit into private equity or hedge funds, but there's also going to be an element of distressed opportunities that are open to you as well. So you're going to be able to enter into a distressed private equity fund or a distressed hedge fund, or maybe even private credit. And in terms of pay, you can expect to be paid similarly in terms of the bonus sizes as the M&A group. Now, I want to note that the restructuring group tends to be inversely correlated with the M&A group. So when M&A activity heats up, there's less restructuring activity because the economy is good. But then when the economy declines, then restructuring activity picks up as M&A activity declines. So it's like a sliding scale. Now, as for top resources that really helped me when I was recruiting for restructuring, the number one resource that is considered the industry standard and the Bible of distressed M&A is a book by a guy named Stephen Moyer called Distressed Debt Analysis. And it is a very lengthy book, I will warn you. It's probably 300 to 400 pages and very technical, but it really does get to the heart of what restructuring is and what investment banks are doing when they are advising companies through bankruptcy situations. Some of the other helpful resources that helped me when I was recruiting are the Houlihan-Lokey case study on the troubled company, the Petition 11 bankruptcy newsletter, and also just a lot of Googling and desktop research on what I could find out there. But hopefully these are enough resources to get you started if you're interested in learning a little bit more. So that's it for this video. And if you liked it or found it informative, please subscribe or leave a like to help the algorithm out. And if you want to learn more about how I ended up in investment banking, you might want to check out my latest video on how I landed my New York City investment banking internship. And as always, I love reading the comments from you guys, so please leave in the comments any suggestions for future content that you'd like me to put out. Thanks.